Welcome to Preemptive Strike, the show where we look at the first hour of a JRPG to gauge the entertainment value of its opening act and gather statistical data to analyze the trends across different games. Join us as we journey through the rich history of JRPGs to see how their gameplay evolves and innovates from one game to the next. For each game, we'll examine how the first hour sets the tone for the rest of the journey, explore the ways in which the story and gameplay unfold to draw the player into the world and keep them coming back, as well as explain general tips, tricks, and trivia for a first-time player. Today, we'll discuss all of this and more on Preemptive Strike. Hello, and welcome to the second episode of Preemptive Strike, the podcast where we cover everything you need to know before you play weird and obscure Japanese role-playing games. Well, some a little bit less obscure than others. Today, we will be covering Dragon Warrior 2 for the NES. So, Tyler, tell me about the information on the release of Dragon Warrior 2.
Okay, so Dragon Warrior 2, also known as Dragon Quest 2, in later translations or localizations is known as Dragon Quest 2, Luminaries of the Legendary Line. It was originally released for the Famicom in January 1987, and to put that date into perspective, The Legend of Zelda 2 was released in 87, Wizardry 3 was released in 87, as well as Ultima 4. So it didn't come to the U.S. like the first game. It didn't come to the U.S. until like about almost 4 years later. Yeah. So the NES release was September 1990.
Yeah.
And for the U.S. in 1990 had Mario Bros. 3. So like this game was doomed at the start in the U.S. Like everyone was buying Mario 3 back then. They weren't going to go for Dragon Warrior 2.
Yeah.
And we'll see that a little bit later when we look at sales numbers.
Yeah, especially because like the most popular RPGs were on PC engines at the time. So
Yeah,
if you were into RPGs, you were buying PCs, not the NES.
right. So yeah, at the time, like Wizardry, the series was on its sixth game, as well as Ultima being on its sixth game.
Yeah, yeah. So a lot more games under their belt as opposed to Dragon Warrior 2.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and not that people would know this at the time, but like the Super Nintendo was like going to come out in like less than a year or two at that point.
Yeah, yeah.
All right, so Dragon Warrior 2 was developed by Chunsoft and published like Enix. Nothing changed from Dragon Warrior 1 or Dragon Quest 1.
Right.
Same notable staff members are still present for this game. Yuji Horii being the designer and like the story writer. We got Koichi Nakamura being the director. Koichi Sugiyama doing the music again, and then Akira Toriyama with the art.
So iconic. That art style. Oh, I was thinking that the
Absolutely.
whole time I was playing the game. Just it's even pixelated. Akira Toriyama's art style is iconic.
Even pixelated, but even like for such a simple enemy like an ant or something like that, like
Right.
really just stands out. Like
Yeah,
the man just had the gift.
he did. He did. So, could you tell me a little bit about what it would cost to buy this game?
Yeah, so when it first released, I mean, we couldn't find a lot of data on this to confirm, but we're going to go on the assumption that it was priced like other NES games, like Dragon Warrior at the time, even, and we're saying that Dragon Warrior 2 was $50 for everything, like complete box. And in today's money, that's in November 2024 inflation, that would be about $120, a little bit less, but.
Yeah.
And so today, if you want to go out and be a collector and buy your own copy, just the cartridge is going to cost you about $54. And if you want complete box manual, the cardboard the cartridge comes in, that's going to be around 185, if you could even find a copy.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, Dragon Warrior 1 has the notoriety of being, air quotes, the first Japanese role playing game, and Dragon Warrior 3 has the notoriety of being, like, one of the best RPGs, at least on the NES,
Mm-hmm.
where Dragon Warrior 2 is kind of just in this weird in between point. It doesn't know what it wants to be. and we'll talk about this a lot later in the later sections of the podcast, but it improved so much on the original, but it doesn't really get the recognition for it. I feel like.
Yes. Yeah, I'm gonna go into a lot of detail on that. Like, I had low expectations going to the Dragon Warrior 2 the first time I played it, or
Yeah.
just Dragon Quest 2.
Yeah.
But like, I definitely was blown away by how much of an improvement it is over 1.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely going to touch on that more later. But before we get to that, how about the sales? So we know what it cost, but how did it sell? How did it
Right.
sell back in the 1987 Japan and 1990 North America?
Yeah, so it was pretty respectable sales when it came to Japan. I guess no surprise nowadays when it comes to sales for Dragon Quest in Japan. It sold about 500,000 when it first released, and then 2.4 million by the end of the year. Since it did release in January, it had plenty of time to sell those copies throughout the year. But for the NES, it only sold 150,000,
Yeah.
which, like I was saying too, like Mario 3 coming out at the time probably didn't help the sales at all. But also, Dragon Warrior 1 had the a Nintendo Power giveaway for just getting rid of copies, and they did not do that for, or to my knowledge, they did not do that for Dragon Warrior 2. So there was a lot
Right.
less getting rid of it.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure as well they did not do that for Dragon Warrior 2.
And I'm going to go out on a limb and say they didn't print as many cartridges for Dragon Warrior 2, noticing the lack of sales for 1. They didn't want to have to make that repeat that mistake of just trying to empty out inventory to clear up space.
Which, you saying that is interesting because they still released Dragon Warrior 3 and 4 in the US, even after these poor sales of,
Right.
Dragon Warrior 1 and 2.
My guess would be is that, like, that would just be their goal was to try and get the like JRPG or RPG genre like popular in the West. And like Dragon Quest 3 especially would be a great game to get people interested in it. Because like Final Fantasy like the original Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest 3 are pretty similar.
Mm-hmm.
And original Final Fantasy sold decently well from what I understand in the US.
Stay tuned for the next episode of Preemptive Strike. But yeah, we'll see. Yeah, we'll see how Final Fantasy compares to this. But
Yeah. So since we've been talking about the NES in the Famicom versions, but can you tell me what other versions and remakes and ports there are for
oh
this game?
yeah, I can tell you about all the different versions that have been released. So uh, there was a version released on the MSX and MSX2 for those in Japan, as well as the Super Famicom mobile phones. Wii. So whenever I say mobile phones, I mean like flip phones, not smartphones. The Wii, Android, iOS platforms, the 3DS, and PlayStation 4. All of those were Japan only, though. All of those. All of those get the love of Dragon Quest II. But yeah,
We would eventually get the Android and iOS ports
true.
in the
Yes.
US.
Which, okay, brief tangent. Why is Dragon Quest 7 not on the app stores?
It's very confused. So it is on like the Japanese app stores,
Oh, that's weird.
but if you notice, like the 3DS remake was localized by Nintendo. Actually, it was not
Oh,
localized by Square Enix.
okay. Okay.
It's like so. It's like has to do with licensing. Why Dragon Quest Seven didn't? Although I'm surprised they didn't just try and port PS1 version to
Okay.
the App Store.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Sorry for that tangent. Sorry. I just was frustrated that 7 is not on there. but
Oh, trust me, I've been frustrated for a decade over that at least.
But there's more ways that you can play Dragon Warrior 2 slash Dragon Quest 2 if you want to in North America, because there was also a release on the Game Boy Color, which I believe that came packaged with 1. Am I
Yes,
wrong? Yeah,
that
so
is correct.
it was 1 and 2. And there's also the most recent release on the Nintendo Switch, which is uh, probably the most accessible in today's times with the modern console, and that was a worldwide release. And we have the HD 2D remake to look forward to in the near future, coming out on all modern consoles, which is definitely going to be a good way to show how the sales of Dragon Quest games have evolved over the years. If Dragon Warrior 2 sold 150,000 copies on the NES. I'd love to see the statistics for the HD2D remake.
Right. Yeah,
Uh, yeah.
like the Game Boy Color version, there was also a Super Famicom remake, which
Mhm.
also bundled with 1 and 2,
Mhm.
and then the HD 2D version that's coming out in 2025 will also be bundled with 1.
Yeah, and we'll go into detail on the story later, but it does seem fitting to package those two together since 2 does follow in the story of 1
Yeah,
to
2 is a
direct.
direct sequel, as
Yeah.
we'll discuss later, and even like the NES, title screen, it refers to Dragon Warriors Part 2, kind of like to signify that it's like a continuation.
Yeah, this continuation builds so much upon the first game that it is its own game in its own right. Um, but it's so much of a bigger game, but not drastically that much longer to beat it. So howlongtobeat.com says to beat the main story is only 16 and a half hours. Compared to Dragon Quest 1, I think was somewhere around 10 hours.
Yeah,
So really only adding like 6.5 hours with how much larger the world is kind of surprising. With completionist time only being 18 and a half hours. Of course, this is an NES game, so there's not really side quests or super long game side quests that span through the entire game that you have to tackle or anything like that. There's probably just a few extra items. I'm not 100% sure what they count as completionist on
right.
howlongtobeat.com. I'm sure.
Like there's
Yeah.
one side quest I could think of to get like an optional piece of armor, but
Okay.
there's not too much when it comes to side quests. I guess like there's probably like a few dungeons that like, or maybe they consider completion, just like getting all the chests and stuff too.
Yeah, I know. In howlongtobeat.com, you can uh, go through the like completionist notes, and some people like comment on what they did. But yeah, the overall legacy and review, legacies and the lasting appeal of Dragon Warrior 2 slash Dragon Quest 2 is very high in Japan and kind of mediocre in the US. So in Japan, it got a 38 out of 40 in Famitsu. Um, but in GamePro magazine on the NES, it got an 18 out of 25. So kind of a middle review. Um, of course, in Japan, it received a lot of other accolades, like how it was inducted into the Platinum Hall of Fame by the game magazine Famicom Communication, Cross Review, and Family Computer Magazine. Game Report Book, it ranked first in character, first in music, first in enthusiasm, second in operability, first in originality, first in bargain, and it won first place in the overall rating. That is a lot of accolades. And the reason that it got all of this praise is because, like we said, it expanded upon the first game alive. Not only did it introduce the ability to use more than just one party character, which honestly just made it comparable to games like Wizardry that have already been out for years, but it also ramped up the difficulty, which for some people they might have liked that, but other people seem to complain a lot about the difficulty of the game. And I can say during my playthrough of the first hour of the game that I found it to be a lot more difficult than the first game.
So I wonder too, with like all the reviews like back then, how far into the game they actually played.
Yeah, yeah.
Because like I don't know, I kind of doubt for Famitsu they played through the entirety. I could be wrong. Like still for the time, like an amazing game.
Mm-hmm.
But like everyone who's played through the entirety of it, like their sentiment is like the difficulty spike, like end game,
Mm,
is what just makes it like just not a fit. Well, it makes a lot of people not a fan of the game just because of that.
yeah, and other ways that it expanded on the first game is a larger world map, overall better graphics. Although uh, with the improved graphics, they do take away one thing from the original game that I missed, and that's the battle backgrounds. Now the battle background is just replaced with a black screen. But it does have better graphics, I will agree, and more sprites. I was pleasantly surprised to see a dog in the um, in Middenhall Castle as well as Leftwyn, the first town.
Oh, don't worry, there's more dogs in the game, and there's
Oh,
actually one that's very important.
okay, okay. Well,
No spoilers though on that one.
I'll have to see if I play through more of the game later. And yeah, overall, loved and respected in Japan, somewhat contested in North America. So let's talk a little bit about the development history of the game. And it's a little bit it's interesting to know what was going on in the behind the scenes because this game came out like only a little over a year after Dragon Warrior 1, right? But they had planned for it to come out even earlier, actually. And there was actually a slight delay in the release that pushed it into January. Before it was supposed to release in November of 86. But it got slightly delayed to January of 87 because they found out at the last minute that the game was not properly balanced. So if you think the game is difficult already, it was even more difficult before then, apparently. And they spent those extra 2 months working on balancing the game, mostly. Throughout the development, they really pushed the limits of the NES, though, and just the limits of cartridge space on the NES cartridges at the time. So just for reference, the capacity of an NES cartridge is 1 megabit, and there were only 10 bytes of free space in the final product of Dragon Quest II. That's just crazy. Like, 10 bytes. What did they have to do for Dragon Warrior 3? Like, that's an even bigger game.
Right, Dragon Warrior 3 and then as well Dragon Warrior 4. Like,
true, yeah. Well, yeah, we'll have to see what they did for that later. They also had to cut some of the plot elements out, actually, to make some of this fit within the limited cartridge space. So, or some happened to be put into remakes or sequels later in the game, like such as the Prince of Canuck being cursed. That was added in the Super Famicom version.
Yeah, that will be in like any other version, such as like the phone or like iOS and Android version, or if you play the version on Switch currently.
Interesting.
I found that interesting, like reading through that, because it just felt natural for the game. I didn't expect it to be something they added.
Yeah.
But also another thing that got cut out too was the Promontory of Olivia event, or Olivia's Promontory, depending on what version of Dragon Quest III you play. So if you play Dragon Quest III, you probably recognize it. It was going to be a storyline that made it into Dragon Quest II, but it got repurposed into 3.
Yeah, as someone who has no experience with Dragon Quest III, I have no idea what that means. But apparently it's important. So, Tyler, could you tell me a little bit about the official artwork of the game and what's in the manual?
The official artwork is like it's that classic Akira Toriyama design. Like you'll look at I'll show some of it on screen. It just bleeds Akira Toriyama. Like it looks great. At least I could say this for the Japanese releases. The Western releases got different artwork that I'll show, and just it's not the same. But that's what they felt at the time would be more, or what Western audiences would find more entertaining or better looking.
Mm-hmm.
So the manual itself is very detailed. There's a lot of information that's very helpful. Honestly, I think the biggest thing that would have helped me as I played through the first hour would have been a map. Because like the map is just so much bigger in Dragon Quest 2 compared to Dragon Quest 1.
Yeah.
And especially at the beginning of the game, like you actually have multiple ways you could go from the starting area. Like east isn't your only option. Basically, you can now go south, you go north, northeast, northwest.
Yeah, I felt that. I really felt that in the first hour of the gameplay because like in Dragon Warrior 1, it was basically just like you could go north and then you basically had to go east, you know. But in Dragon Warrior 2, there were a lot more places to go, and that left me getting a little bit lost, actually, in my first hour.
Not only are there a lot more places to go, there's also a larger distance in between places.
Mm-hmm.
And that really just sells the whole point that, like, this is so much bigger.
Yeah, I didn't mention this in the development section, but the town that's between Middenhall and Canuck, the left wing, that wasn't there in the original. They added that after the balancing issues.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, they wanted you to just go straight from Middenhall to the Canuck.
That's actually how I played.
Huh.
I forgot, or I didn't know. I guess Left Wind was there,
Hmm.
or I didn't remember. I should say, since I have played the Switch version of 2 before.
Well, I had to stop there. I was dying.
But yeah, so other than the map, which is very helpful, the manual goes over the story. I don't feel the need to really describe how the manual describes the story, especially because the game starts off with a cutscene that just gets you right into the what's going on in the story.
Unless you're playing the Japanese version, where they don't get that cutscene. But we'll talk about that in the version differences section.
See, the manual also gives you just how to play the game, like going through like what menu options do, as well as like what buttons you need to press on the controller. It gives official artwork, and like the Japanese manual versus the American or Western manual are going to be much different. They give you some spell names and kind of what they do, as well as some items and equipment.
I want to say
So
about the artwork in the English manual, the North American manual, is the art direction is much more medieval fantasy. Like it feels like something you'd see out of a like Dungeons and Dragon DM guide or something like
yeah,
that.
yeah,
It
definitely. Like I mean, it's even or to me, it reminds me of like the original Final Fantasy artwork to a certain degree.
mm-hmm. Yeah. Or like it also gives me vibes of like Lord of the Rings almost. I might have just pissed off like a bunch of Lord of the Rings fans out there, but um, it it just gives me that medieval high fantasy, you know, wizards, knights, and other kind of things. And I mean that's what they were going for, right? They were trying to cater towards an audience that grew up with this kind of material, and I think they did a good job at that. It just didn't sell well.
Yeah, for sure. So one thing that Japan got that we didn't get for at least the original release would be the like a guidebook.
Yeah.
Now you could see this online. I'll leave a link in the description on the internet archive of the Japanese guidebook, and it gives you a way more detailed map than like what the is shown in the manual, and like that would be very helpful. As well as I believe it gives different maps of some dungeons.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Every
It
dungeon.
if Okay, great. Yeah, because those later dungeons, you definitely need the map out. Like if I was a kid, like I would definitely be getting some graph paper to chart out these dungeons. But yeah, the Japanese guidebook also goes through the stats and what they mean, gives some more information on the characters, and it goes through enemy. It gives you the bestiary essentially of all the enemies. It gives you explanations of the weapons, items, armors.
Yeah.
All right, and then we have some interesting tidbits that like where to put them. So whenever, at least in the U.S. version, I can't speak for the Japanese version. Your party members get like, somewhat of a random name selected. Like you don't pick like you name the main character, but the prince and the princess that you'll later get in the game will have different numbers that the game just kind of calculates itself based on the name you put.
Yeah.
So, for instance, like the prince, like the second character you get for your team, for my gameplay, his name is Braun.
In my case, his name was Orfeo.
Yeah, so like, that's to me that's pretty interesting that they have different names. So in
Yeah.
the Japanese version, there's a way to actually change those names since you don't get to pick them yourself. We don't get that option in the West. Another interesting fun fact: if you name your hero TUT, all capitals, and you select the message speed as fast, you won't get random encounters until you reach the town of Lionport. But the game will freeze at that point, and so
You're
you
forced to
could travel
reset.
that far if you wanted to, like
Yeah.
loot some dungeons, get some different items. And I'm curious if like a speed run like made use of that. But
Probably.
yeah, so to avoid your game freezing for that, you would just save your game, quit, or like reset the console, and then you can continue. And then there's a glitch also where you share your weapons. So like you equip a weapon, then you transfer it to the prince and have him equip it, and then both those party members will have the same like attack boost from the weapon until they level up.
Yeah, that could be
So
pretty helpful for like some of the early parts of the game.
Well,
whenever
any part
money's
of the game,
tight.
because most of the party members can equip the same like equipment.
Okay. Okay.
So like it would be very versatile. So like you have three characters. You have the Prince of Middenhall, which is your main character. He's just nothing but brute force attack. Like he cannot learn spells.
Right.
You have the Princess of Moonbrook, which is the final party member you get,
Mm-hmm.
and she is like all about like magic casting.
Yeah.
And then you have the Prince of Canuck, I don't know, and he is somewhere in between. He's like a hybrid of the two of them.
Yeah.
So like
Yeah.
he's very versatile and can basically equip the same things that like those two characters can equip.
Yeah. It's
All right, while
interesting
we're
how they tried to make so much variety with so little. Like you only have three party members, but they
right,
gave each of them a role.
while we're talking about I guess like more interesting ideas, could you go over the version differences of the different releases?
Yeah, I'll definitely go over some of those version differences. So, not only are the titles different, Dragon Quest in Japan versus Dragon Warrior in the U.S., but there's several other name changes as well as just fundamental differences between the two games because there's a almost 4 year difference between the two games. A lot was added to the U.S. version that wasn't in the original Japanese version. For example, in the original Japanese version, they still used password saves. That kind of blew my mind whenever I read that. I was like, come on, it's 1987. They had Zelda 2 come out in this year, and they're still using password saves. I could not imagine how frustrating that would be for how much you have to save in role-playing games. Like I would hate to have to write down a password just to do that. Although I could imagine that would make for some fun like schoolyard trading. Like, oh yeah, I made it past this dungeon and here's the password that I have. But I don't know. I wasn't a kid growing up in 1987 Japan. Also in the US version, but not the Japanese version, was an introduction. So like Tyler had mentioned earlier, there's an introduction showing the storming of Moonbrook Castle that just wasn't present in the Japanese game. You were just thrown straight into Middenhall Castle and then expected to go to Cannock, and that's it. So I prefer the US version, definitely. And I'm assuming that this translated into like re-releases of the game, even the Japanese version.
I can speak for the like Switch version I played in the past, and like yeah, that cutscene still plays at the beginning.
Okay. So assuming that the Switch release of Dragon Quest II is the same between Japan and the US, that would mean that Japan retroactively got the cutscene added.
Yeah, well, they probably got it in the Super Famicom remake with
True.
the one bundled in.
So there's also some changes in the names of the cities and castles and towns, just to make the western areas sound more, I think, like medieval fantasy, and also to stay consistent with the first game, as well as cover up some of those name differences that appear in the first game, like how Erdrick is the name of the hero of legend versus Loto. Just for example, some of the name changes that we have: Middenhall, the first castle that you're in Dragon Warrior 2, is actually called Roresia in the Famicom version, Dragon Quest 2. Leftwind, first town that you can travel to, is called Lyriza, and Cannock, the second castle that you go to, is called Samartria in the Japanese version. Very interesting name changes. I can't figure out how they came to the conclusion that like this is what we have to name it. Like, did they just throw darts at a board and say like, Samartria sounds like we could name it Cannock. How about that?
My guess for like Left Wind, for instance, was that it was the first town left of where you start.
Hmm.
So I was wondering maybe they just wanted to make like a pun kind of with it.
It
Because otherwise, like logically, that none of these names really, like what they changed them to, make much sense.
Yeah, it is interesting though. wondering what went through the developers' minds back in those days. Of course, some of the item names were also changed, so I'm not going to go into detail on every single item, but notable examples would be the holy water being changed to fairy water. Of course, having religious anything religious being censored. It's just standard for Nintendo back in the day. The Chimera's wing in the Famicom version was changed to the Wing of the Wyvern in NES, and I think Wing of the Wyvern sounds way cooler, and it's, I like that alliteration, Wing, Wyvern, so cool, but they just called it the Chimera's Wing, and that's what it's called in future installments as well. As far as like weapons, armors, and shields, translation names, anything involving Erdrick in the NES version, of course, is named with Loto in the Famicom version. So nothing too extensive there. Of course, spell names were changed in the West to be more indicative of what they do rather than just being almost nonsensical automatopoeias in the Japanese version. While they would make sense to a native Japanese speaker, it doesn't make like a direct translation of those words. Well, there is no direct translation, but like if we just took the romanization of the Japanese spells and put them into the NES game, I would imagine people would be very confused. So I kind of like the NES spell names more for the time. It makes sense because it's not like the North American audience had a lot to go off of other than like Ultima, Wizardry, those kind of series.
Yeah, that was definitely a good approach for them to just make the spell names like pretty basic, like things like Fireball or Infernos or Sleep.
Yeah. Now, not surprisingly, as far as version differences go, the North American version was easier than the Japanese version. I know. Even though I had a hard time with the first hour of the game, the North American version was easier because experience values of the enemies were increased, so you can gain levels faster, and also some of the stats of the enemies were decreased, but only by like 1 or 2 points. But that can go a long way at the beginning of the game. Also, in the US version, there's a few... there's the changes with the House of Healing. So in the Japanese version, the House of Healing is actually just called the Church and has a symbol of a cross. Arguably, this is worse in the House of Healing because they use a pentagram symbol, which I found kind of surprising. Like,
it's very ironic. Just like you can't have the religious symbolism in America, but you could have the pentagram, no problem, and that gets through to be like released.
I guess so. It's technically not a pentagram because the pentagram is an upside down star, and the star's the right side up.
Yeah, but like looking at on like a small CRT back then, like you barely be able to tell.
True.
They also couldn't. So whenever your character or one of your party member dies, like they get carried around in a coffin. Mm-hmm. But that was viewed as too religious as well, so they changed it to be ghost sprites in the Western, at least.
That's interesting. I mean, it's like I don't know. I guess because the coffin has a cross on it, it's automatically too religious.
Yeah, I guess.
And also, one other change they made, unsurprisingly, is the title screen. So they have two different names, Dragon Quest in Japan and Dragon Warrior in the US. But like Tyler mentioned before, in the US it's called Dragon Warrior Part 2, indicating that it is a direct sequel of the first game. And it also shows you 3 main party members.
Yeah, I kind of have to say that I prefer the US title screen. Like, the Japanese one, just too bare bones. Like, just one flat-colored background with the title. Where the US gets, like, the whole animation of, like, the characters walking through the cave before, like, you get the start.
Yeah, I agree. So, Tyler, can you tell me a little bit about your personal history with Dragon Warrior 2?
Absolutely. So, it's going to be very similar to Dragon Quest 1 or Dragon Warrior 1 we last discussed.
Yeah.
I played the Switch port, like the trilogy, because I got it physically. Comes with 1, 2, and 3 on there. I played that about 2 years ago, give or take a year, and I had a pretty good time with it. I thought it was very enjoyable. I had low expectations since a lot of the fans don't like the game, but honestly, I was kind of blown away with just how impressive it was compared, or how much of an upgrade it was compared to Dragon Quest One.
Yeah.
And like, I really think like it stands out compared to like even like some actually some pretty good like RPGs. Like, I would put it on par with like something as good as like Final Fantasy IV.
Man, that is probably very controversial, but I don't really know much because, much like Dragon Quest One, Dragon Warrior One, I have no history with it whatsoever. Absolutely nothing. I know it exists.
Have to change that.
Okay, okay. Well, we did change that. We played the first hour of the game, and I think it's almost time to talk about that. But there's one thing I want to do before that. Do you remember what it was?
I believe you wanted an overview of the gameplay.
Ah, yeah, that's right. Because all of these RPGs have so many stats in them that don't always line up. I want to discuss just a little bit all of the stats that are in Dragon Warrior 2, what they do, and how they work. So,
Alright, so
yeah.
for starters, we have strength, which is the pretty consistent across most RPGs in general. It ends up telling you how much damage you're going to actually do with your attacks, like your physical attack, like just the basic attack action. You have agility. Now, it's not what you think, because in most games, agility is like determines like turn order, but agility in Dragon Warrior 2 is actually your defense power.
That really threw me off whenever I first read that. Like, I guess they're going for like dodging almost. Like if you don't take an attack head on, then it does less damage.
Yes, I'd agree with that, especially too because there's not a defend command like there are in other RPGs. It's actually called parry,
Yeah.
and like I feel like that gives like a similar connotation or like interpretation to taking less damage.
Agreed.
So other than that, we have HP, which is just your hit points. Goes to zero, you're dead. MP for casting spells. Your attack power is just your strength stat, and then whatever damage value that your weapon currently equipped gives you, and it's just those two added together. And then you have your defense power, which is your agility stat added to the equipment pieces. Or agility stat they give you. Although it's just kind of it does not translate well the more I think about it because like you're putting on like a heavy set suit of armor and your agility is going up essentially.
True. Yeah, that
Although
is
it,
true.
it does say defense power still, but
Although,
it's,
now that I
yeah,
think about it, calling defense agility finally gives a justification for all of those scantily clad women with their very thin, skimpy armor. That would indeed increase your agility.
Dragon Quest, you did it again.
So, anything
So
else?
I guess the other stat you would see in the status screen would be level.
Yeah.
I didn't know this at first, but there's actually the characters have different max levels. The main
Okay.
character's level 50, but I think they did this because the main character has no spells.
Mm-hmm.
Literally can just attack and that's it. Then you have the Prince of Cannock the Prince of Cannock whose max level is 45. He's like somewhere in between, like just a hybrid of the other prince and the princess. And then the Princess of Moonbrook only can get up to level 35. You get her like a little bit later in the game compared to the first two characters, so I guess it kind of is nice that she doesn't have to level up as much of them as the other two characters. So like
Mm-hmm.
you're not, or so I guess essentially they would get to max level at the same time, and you wouldn't have to spend like a few more hours grinding just for one character.
Yeah. From what I understand, they
Although
do have different experience gains. Like, there's a little bit of like some rubber banding almost with the experience points. Maybe not rubber banding because not in the sense of like if their character's under leveled, they'll level up faster. Not like that, but um,
it takes
they
less experience to get some levels.
yeah. So like your main character takes less experience points to get to level 50, or about the same experience points to get to level 50 as the Princess of Moonbrook does to get to level 35, or something like that.
Yeah, so that's not like a foreign concept for the series either. Like
Mm-hmm.
Dragon Quest V, for instance, the monsters max level was all over the place. You had some monsters that could only get to level 16. You had some monsters that get hit to like 25 or 30, and then you have other monsters that get to level 99. But like the monsters that would like get to only level 16, like they only get like 15 level ups tops, depending on what level you recruit them at. But like they get insane like stat growths for every level because of that.
Mm-hmm.
But also like those last levels, like you got to get like a million experience or something insane. So like it's almost equivalent to if you grinded up the 99. But that's discussion for another day.
Yes, when we get there. So,
So,
are there any like interesting menu commands that are in this game that weren't in the last game,
um,
or are they mostly the same?
they're mostly the same,
Okay.
but they got rid of the stairs
Yes,
status,
I was so
which is
looking
really
forward to
nice.
that.
Yeah, so you could actually just walk on stairs and go up.
Yeah,
Save feels so much smoother just playing the game itself.
yeah,
I guess there's one thing, like when it comes to using items and stuff like that, you now have the option to trade items between your party members.
makes sense why that wasn't in the first game. There was no other party members.
Exactly. And then for the battle menu, there it's practically the same.
Yeah.
The interesting thing though is because the first your main character does not have the ability to use spells, his spell like where the space where his spell command would be is actually replaced with run.
Hmm. Makes sense.
Alright, so I think that covers about enough for getting a good overview of the gameplay.
Okay.
So why don't we talk about what we did in our first hour?
I think this is a good time to talk about our first hour.
So I'd say one of the things that stood out to me the most. Well, first off, like this is like a cutscene for the first time. Like I feel like cutscenes weren't that prominent back then. Like you
I know.
usually just you get text.
Yeah,
Of
but
course, this is just
remember,
the American version.
yes, I was just about to say that. It's only the North American version that had that, and then subsequent releases of the game.
I guess another thing that stood out to me at the beginning was that like, there was just a lot more. It felt like at least that there was a lot more variety of enemies.
Yeah, okay. If you want to start talking about just enemies, I want to say that the encounter rate felt inconsistent for me. Like
Hmm.
adventuring in the overworld, at some points there were times where I could walk from essentially Middenhall to Cannock without getting an encounter, and then other times I would get into an encounter literally every step.
Yes.
It was
I'm
very inconsistent,
Now. Did you notice that more when you were running from encounters, or just in general?
just in general.
Okay. Because there was plenty of times where like I would just take one step after an encounter and then get into another encounter.
There were some
But
times where I would exit a town or a castle and get into an
hmm
encounter. the the same like time that I spawned on the tile, it would also trigger an encounter.
see, I didn't have that when I left the like towns or castles, but I noticed it like in screen transitions and dungeons.
Ah, yeah,
Like I know Final Fantasy does it where like that first like tile like in the room there can't be an encounter,
right.
but that is definitely not the case here.
Yeah, I mean they didn't have a lot to go on in Dragon Warrior 2, right?
Right.
Like they had a few wizardry games, a few Ultima games, and Dragon Warrior 1 to go off of.
Let's see. I guess another thing I noticed too is that like you level up so much faster, or at least it felt
Yeah.
that way.
Yeah,
It
probably
felt
because
good.
of multiple enemies in the battle screen now.
Yes.
Which disappointingly led to the black battle screen rather than the colorful animated, not animated, but like colorful background screens in Dragon
Yeah.
Warrior 1.
That is one nice thing that like later releases like bring back for
Cool.
Dragon Warrior 2.
Yeah.
And like it was consistent with that with like even like the port like on Switch of like the iOS and Android versions.
Yeah. Yeah. So, um, getting a little bit off track here, talking about all these encounters. What I want to talk about before that, just in like the first few minutes of the game, whenever you first start to adventure around the castle,
Yes.
I was surprised to see there was a like warp that they let you take, and of course it took you nowhere, but
Right. Just took
well,
you to an island essentially. You couldn't go anywhere.
yeah, it took you to an island and you didn't have any options to do anything. But I think it was just an interesting gameplay mechanic to introduce something like that so early, and you see that so much in older games where they're teaching you how to play the game just naturally rather than giving you a tutorial for like, oh, hey, this is a warp. If you walk through this, then you can get transported to other lands. And it's like,
Yeah.
they didn't say any of that. Well, there was like that wizard NPC that was in front of the portal, but, um, one box of dialogue and that's it. If that's all your tutorial is, I am happy with that.
But not only that, I think it emphasized just the scale of like the land itself or like the map compared to the original.
Yeah,
Because like no matter where you walk, like outside of the castle, like you cannot see where that island was at all. Like in the overworld,
yeah,
like
yeah,
not in the distance. So it's like just makes you think. It's like, man, when am I going to get to this point in the game? Like, what's actually going to be in that other island right next to this island?
yeah,
And like,
yeah.
is it going to be important?
I agree. I agree. That did leave me wanting a little bit more. Another
But
thing that I noticed within just walking around the halls of Middenhall was
hmm
the new sprites. I know I pointed this out before, but there is a dog sprite now. I
yes,
loved it. I'm not really a dog person in real life, but I do appreciate a good dog sprite.
yeah, it is for NES too. Like, it's pretty good.
Yeah. So now we venture outside of the castle walls and we adventure around the overworld. Um, I
So
yeah,
yeah, did you head north or did you head south at first?
I I believe. Oh man, I'm gonna kick myself whenever I watch my gameplay again. But I believe I headed south first, and then as soon as I saw a bridge, I was like, nope, nope, not going across the bridge. I was like,
Uh
screw
huh.
that. I remember from the first game, bridges mean harder enemies, so I'm not going to cross that bridge. I only found out later that crossing bridges in Dragon Warrior 2 does not automatically mean harder enemies. But
Yep.
what direction did you go?
So I went south at first because I figured there's probably a little bit better spawn rates than like right next to the castle.
Yeah,
But I didn't go all the way south, and I wish I did at the time
okay.
because later in the game, I got to a point where I went to the cave to Hamlin. It's called, and
Okay.
like before you go, there's just like this guard post, and you could talk to like a wizard there. And
Yeah.
he's like, "Oh, did you go to the monolith south of Middenhall? My brother lives there, and he'll tell you all about keys."
That might have something to do with that silver key that they talked about in Cannock.
So yeah, so I towards the end of my gameplay, I do end up going to that monolith south of Middenhall,
Yeah.
and he does tell you about keys. He tells you to go west of Cannock, and there will be a cave, and that cave's a lake cave. So I entered that cave, and that was like one of my hours up exactly.
Wow, man, you made it so much farther than me. Um, so I'll explain how I got tripped up after we get to that point. But so once you start adventuring outside of Middenhall, you find out you have to travel west, and once you travel west, you go to Left Wing, so to the left.
I didn't actually go to Leftwind first. I just
Yeah,
kept
you just
heading
went straight
north
to
and
the
ended up
castle.
getting the Cannock Castle instead.
Yeah, I did learn that pretty quickly that there's like multiple routes to the same place, which is
Yeah,
a huge step away from Dragon Warrior 1, where you really only have one direction to go at
for
most
sure.
points in the overworld.
But again, too, like I think we mentioned this earlier in the discussion that like the towns are just spread out so much further.
Yeah. So, yeah, I stopped at Left Twin, checked things out, talked to the NPCs, and nothing much, nothing too much to comment on there. Then to the castle, Cannock
Yeah,
Castle. You learn that the prince was taken to a cave in the, or not taken. He went to a cave in the east.
yes, that cave's the Spring of Bravery.
Yes, thank you. So he went to the Spring of Bravery, and it's pretty obvious that, oh, hey, you have to travel east. Now, if you're told to travel east, I know that old games can be kind of tricky sometimes, and I'm not saying that I confused west and east. But what I am saying is there was like a you could go like up and east or down and east, I guess like northeast or southeast.
Right.
Um, they wanted you to go just a little bit northeast. I figured that out. I went a little bit northeast. Okay. Kept traveling east, and I made it to the Spring of Bravery cave. Now, inside of this cave, there is an NPC, One, well, no, there's two
There's
NPCs
two,
in
yes.
the cave. But the first NPC that you encounter, do you happen to know what he tells you?
I'm blanking on what he tells you.
He says something to the effect of, "Oh," or he asks you, "Have you visited the Spring of Bravery yet?" And it's like a yes/no answer. So like, of
Mm-hmm.
course, my answer was no, I haven't seen it yet. And he's like, "Oh, well, you better go visit it." I took that to mean that the cave, the dungeon that I was in, was not the Spring of
Yes.
Bravery. And I was like, "Oh, this isn't it. This isn't it. I gotta go back. I gotta go back to the Castle Cannock. Like maybe I was supposed to go like a little bit southeast, and I went
Uh-huh.
northeast instead. So I went all the way back to Castle Cannock, and that's where I got wrong. And that's where I got it wrong, and I screwed up, and that's why my first hour was so janked because of that guy saying, "Oh, you didn't go to the Spring of Bravery. You should definitely stop there." I get, I get. The
Mm-hmm.
intention was probably to go to the Spring of Bravery that's like one room away from there and visit the wizard that's there so that
Right.
you can find out that the Prince of Cannock has moved away. But like I took it to mean that the cave I was in was not the Spring of Bravery. I wish there was some kind of way to tell like what dungeon you're in. Like just something, but there's nothing.
Yes.
That's one quality of life feature that modern games have that
Yes,
I
because like
do
I had the
appreciate. Yeah.
yes, I had to look up like names of like all of these caves and whatever like after we played for my notes.
Yeah, of course.
Because like it is confusing. Like, and if there's an NPC right at the town saying like immediately, "Hey, this is Leftwind," or "This is Cannock Castle,"
Yeah, and
like
that's why the
I would not
instruction
know. Like,
manuals had
and
such
like,
extensive guides.
but you don't realize like some things you take for granted either. Like nowadays in games, like just a pop up in like the corner of the screen saying like the area you're in,
I know. Yeah.
or checking the map in an area and like it has the area name.
Yeah. So entering into the Spring of Bravery, I believe was around like halfway, like half an hour in to my first hour, and um,
Mm-hmm.
I think here would be a good point to just talk about the overall difficulty of the game. So, of course, this being the first Dragon Warrior game where they introduced multiple enemies and multiple party members, they had a little bit of trouble balancing the game, and I can tell that. I could really tell that because I died a handful of times. We'll talk about that more at the end, but I actually died. I thought I was going to make it through this game without dying, and I was going to be like, people called this game harder than Dragon Warrior 1. They're sissies. But no, it is harder.
Well, yeah, the crazy part to me too, it's like you didn't even get to the hard part of the game. Like
Yeah,
you just got to the beginning.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So like buckle up, Buttercup, whenever you get if we ever play more of this game.
Oh, yeah.
How for instance, the one thing that stood out to me and made the game much easier at the beginning was medical herbs.
Yes, yes.
So
Okay.
they were different in this game. They actually healed for more than they did in Dragon Quest One. They
Mm-hmm.
also were cheaper.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
damn it, I loaded up on medical herbs, especially because your main character cannot heal or he doesn't have the magic.
yeah. So two things. One, I was stubborn and didn't want to buy medical herbs. I was like, no, I'm gonna save my money, and I ended up losing more money by dying. Um,
Right.
but
See, I learned
yeah,
that the hard way last or playing Dragon Quest One last time.
and that I didn't die at all playing Dragon Quest One, so I didn't have this kind of fear. Two, enemies dropped medical herbs. Um,
Yes.
like I don't want to say frequently, but it was often enough that it happened like 5 times within the first hour.
Mm-hmm.
So uh, I didn't always have to buy the medical herbs, but eventually I did start buying medical herbs because I was like, okay, I'm really gonna die if I don't just start buying medical herbs. I'm saving money by spending money.
Right. Yeah, I didn't buy medical herbs in the first game because they were so expensive and like you didn't get gold that fast. Like I want to say
Right.
there were 24 gold in Dragon Quest or Dragon Warrior 1,
Yeah.
and of course they only healed for 15.
Yeah, and like you said, the main character does not have access to magic, so that made healing with herbs so much of a necessity at the beginning of the game.
Let's see,
So,
I guess all
yeah,
so yeah, like continue like what a typical playthrough would be, like the first hour.
Mm-hmm.
In Spring of Bravery, you talk to the wizard who tells you that the prince isn't there, but he tells you the prince goes to, or is heading towards, or not heading towards, he's going to Meadenhall Castle, the
Correct.
first castle you start the game in.
Yes.
And I've heard a lot of people throughout the years saying that, like, this was a mistranslation, because if you go to Meadenhall Castle, he will not be there. He's actually in Leftwyn in the town, or the
So,
inn.
wait. You're skipping. So, you go to the wizard. He says he went to Midenhall Castle. You talk to the king in Midenhall Castle, and the king in Midenhall Castle tells you that the prince went to Midenhall, as if it's just a town.
Oh, okay, yeah, you're right.
Yeah. So the king just says, "Oh, the prince. He was just here. He went to Midenhall," and that's where I spent the last 5 minutes of my gameplay. I think somewhere
Mm-hmm.
around there, because I had already wasted so much time because of the freaking guy in the cave. But um, then I was super lost because the king said he went to Midenhall, and I remember at the like last few minutes, I was like, "There's a town just called Midenhall." So like, is the like the little area that's the first floor of Midenhall Castle essentially, like, is that considered like the town of Midenhall?
Uh-huh.
Maybe. So I went around, talked to the NPCs. Then I ended up traveling south of the town, and that's where I ended my first hour. Was just traveling south and across the bridge, and then I just kept heading south. But at that point, my hour had gone up because of random encounters.
Right. So yeah, after the Spring of Bravery, I went back to Cannock Castle.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to save, and so I just coincidentally talked to the king to get that dialogue, but I just mashed through it.
Yeah.
But, like, I do remember seeing Cannock show up, so to me, I head south and happened to stop at Leftwyn to heal.
You headed south, but you ended up in a town to the west.
Well, it's not really west of Cannock too much.
Oh, Canik. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wait,
Like,
you
it's a
said
pretty straight shot.
wait. So
Yes.
you exited the spring.
Yes, I went to Cannock because Cannock is right to the west
You
of
went
it.
to the Canik and you talked to the king at Canik.
Yes.
There's no dialogue from that king in Canik. It's the king in Midenhall that gives you the dialogue saying that the prince went to Midenhall as if it's a town.
Oh. No, I
Yeah.
didn't even talk to the king in Midenhall about that.
Okay.
So yeah, I went from Cannock to Leftwyn then, and the prince was there.
Yeah. Okay. I guess all you have to do is go to the spring and that spawns him in left one.
But anyway, I just making that stop to heal up. Like, I wouldn't have stopped at Leftwyn otherwise, but maybe that's what they kind of intended you to do. Like, take that path, like go to Cannock because like you need to heal up after the spring, and then head south on your way to heading to Midenhall.
Maybe that could be the circumstance. But all right, now rub it in. How much farther did you make it in the first
All right,
hour?
so like I kind of alluded to this. So like I went after I got the prince, I grinded him up like 2 levels, but then I got impatient. Said, okay, I'll just grind him as I get to the next area.
Yep.
So I was talking about this before. Like it was called the Cave to Hamlin,
Yep.
where that guy is like, oh, you should talk to my brother in the Monolith South Midenhall. So in that cave to Hamlin, like I got into like one battle and like the enemies were really strong there. Like it was telling me I was like definitely too underleveled for that area at the time.
Oh, okay.
And like the prince got like one shot because he was underleveled because I didn't grind him.
Yeah.
And so then I went to Cannock. Actually, no, I went to Leftwyn to revive the prince. Got all the way back to Midenhall. Went to the monolith, and then the guy told me about that lake cave, like I said.
Mm-hmm.
And so I traveled all the way there before my hour went up.
Yeah. I remember within the first hour there was that one, the one guy who's like blocking the bridge to Moonbrook. That was like,
Yeah.
oh, you can only go through here if you have more than one party member.
Yes, that was like where you go down the steps, and that's the cave to Hamlin.
Yeah. Okay.
because that's like your path to get the Moonbrook.
Okay. Now I get it. Yeah. That's what I was looking forward to if I had made it any farther. But I will say, at least within the first hour of what I played through, I was greeted with a wonderful sprite of the wild mouse. And I have to
Uh
say, the
huh.
wild mouse sprite is awesome in Dragon Warrior because it looks exactly like Biggie Cheese from back at the barnyard. I am telling you, that is the prototype for Biggie Cheese.
I mean, just leave it to Toriyama to make peak designs.
Yeah, I know, copied by back in the barnyard. So,
But yeah, like one
yeah,
thought I had to playing through Dragon Quest II is that like it just felt more like a standard, like typical like JRPG than Dragon Quest One. Like Dragon Quest One gets all the credit for it since it came first, but like so many other games just feel like they were inspired like Dragon Quest Two.
which is hard
Or,
to believe that it's like the black sheep of the
right.
at least the original Erdrick trilogy.
But also it really like most NES or unlike most NES sequels where they basically change up the gameplay completely. Dragon Quest 2 just did nothing but expand upon like the gameplay of the previous game.
Yeah, yeah, they did do that a lot in the NES days. All right. So, can you tell me, Tyler, is there anything we missed out on by only playing the first hour? What do we have to look forward to if we continue playing the game?
We gameplay wise, we missed out on our third party members seeing how the party kind of how cohesive the party is when you have your third party member. She's the princess of Moonbrook.
Yeah, I want to know. I want to know what my princess is named, since
I
it's
don't know what my princess' name is either. Or
yeah.
I don't think they mentioned her name in the cutscene at the beginning. I could be wrong.
Okay.
But anyway, yeah, so I would say you probably get her within 4 to 5 hours of gameplay.
Okay.
She is the magic user of the group. Like she can attack still physically, but like it's gonna be a lot weaker than her magic. Late game or whatever, she's probably the best character. Like she gets the kaboom like spell,
Yeah.
and that just rips through so many random encounters.
I believe in the English version that's explode it or some variant of explode.
That would make sense.
Yeah.
So another big thing we missed out on was having a ship that actually travel around the world. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
because what's so cool about like when you get the ship is you just head east a little bit and you're immediately to Tantagal, the castle of the first game, or like the where you start out the first game.
Yeah, I could imagine that
And
being amazing to a little kid in 1987 Japan seeing that for the first time.
but not only that, you could take the ship immediately across the castle or across the river from where Tantagal is and go to the Dragon Lord's castle, like the final dungeon of the first game. You could just walk through it all. But I won't spoil too much of what's the surprise there.
Okay, so it sounds like we
I
missed out on quite a lot.
Yeah, but also too, it's like I feel like our impression of the game would be much different if we played more than the first hour or if we played just through the whole game. Because like I was saying, like the difficulty spike towards the end is just massive. And it's just very tedious and difficult to play. And
And I
that's what like
already thought the
everyone who
game was
hates the game.
difficult.
Right. So like that's why or so many people just like hate the game.
Well, I think within my first hour of playing, there was enough information given to keep me interested in playing. Like, what is this? What happened at Moonbrook? Are we going to go to Moonbrook? What about these silver keys that I hear about? Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I mean, in my case, am I ever gonna find the prince? like, there was definitely enough to keep me going, and yeah, from what you're explaining, I think that it's if you're willing to play through Dragon Warrior One, you should definitely play through Dragon Warrior Two.
I agree, and like I look very much forward to see how they expand the gameplay and everything with the HD 2D remake coming out hopefully this year.
Yes, that's
Because
cool.
even the ending of Dragon Quest 3 HD 2D, they have like a post-credits scene that sets up for events of Dragon Quest II.
Interesting. We'll see how all of these connect together at some point.
Yeah, if one thing does come, or they add for Dragon Quest II HD 2D, I hope it's party chat. Like, where you could actually talk to your party members, because
Yeah.
this would be the first time they would actually flesh out these characters, other than just kind of have, like, a few lines of dialogue throughout the entire game.
Mm-hmm.
But also, I'd like to imagine they give the main hero at least some abilities or something. Like, please let him do more than just a physical attack.
That did kind of hamper my experience a little bit since I never had got the prince in my party. It was mostly just a smashing attack fest.
Yes.
So, tell me, Tyler, what was your encounter rate, among other things, within the first hour?
So I've gotten a total of 77 encounters.
Wow. So, what rate would that be per minute?
1.283 per minute.
Nice. I was a little bit more unlucky than you, and I had 86 encounters in the first hour, uh, which is 1.433 per minute.
Well, I feel like the difference there was more of you were lost, like exploring a lot
Yeah,
more.
true. But from all of those encounters, Tyler, can you tell me how many deaths you had?
I had just one towards the very beginning of the game.
Yeah. Me? Five. Five deaths. So much different than one from the first game. Or, one. Zero. There was zero in the first game. Now there's five. I was very, very sad. Um,
Let's see, how quick did you get into your first encounter?
it took me 7 minutes and 45 seconds.
All right. I got mine in 6 minutes 48 seconds, so
Okay.
not too far off.
Yeah, not too far off. But from all of those encounters, how many times did you have to heal at an inn?
9 times.
9. I only visited the inn 7 times, but that's because I died, and dying counts as an instant heal.
Right.
And then, finally, from all of those battles, what was your level at the end?
I was level 7
Nice.
for my main character, and I believe the prince, I didn't write it down, but I believe he was level 4.
That's interesting. Even from the grinding for the prince, you still ended at level 7, because I also ended at level 7. Maybe from those
Yes.
86 battles.
I don't know, it's like once I hit level 7, it just felt like the amount of experience you needed for the next level was like a lot more.
Mm-hmm. So, Tyler, do you have any closing thoughts?
I'd say if you see a bunch of people hating on the internet of a game, it still doesn't mean you shouldn't give it a chance or try to come up with your own opinion on it. Because I honestly thought about skipping Dragon Quest II as I was playing through a lot of the. Or trying to finish playing through all the Dragon Quest games. Just because I had heard so much bad about it, but like I was just kind of. Like I said, I've been blown away by how much I liked it. Like, it is a. I think it's a great game still, even with today's standards.
Mm-hmm. I agree. I agree that it's a very good game. Don't know much about the fandom, but the fandom should listen to you and give this game a shot.
So I think that it sounds like you would pay $1 for your hour of gameplay.
I would. I would pay $1 for this 1 hour of gameplay. Now, will that keep me entertained throughout the later parts of the game? Maybe. I don't know. We'll see. And you, would you pay $1?
Yes, I would. I mean, I have paid $1 or more than $1 in the past to buy the game,
True.
and I'm going to pay whatever the price is for when the HD 2D comes out of it.
All right. Yeah, I like it. So, I think that wraps it up.
Thank you for watching today and sticking to the end. We hope we gave an accurate representation of the first hour of gameplay, and more importantly, we hope we inspired you to check out the game and give it a chance. If you liked the video, please like, comment, and subscribe for more JRPG content from us. We have a lot of projects in production, so keep an eye out. Let us know what games and series you'd like us to cover in the future. Follow us on Twitter at encounter_rate. If you want to listen to our content in a podcast format, check us out at the places listed on screen. Links will be in description. We plan to upload to additional podcast sites in the future, and if you have any preferred podcast sites you wish we were on, let us know in the comments. Thank you again for watching. Until next time, have a great day.